everybody, and welcome to another one of our special interviews in the podcast studio. We're back here, and we're joined by Paolo Cuomo, who's Executive Director at Gracechurch. Welcome back, Paolo. For people who don't know you, perhaps you could just give us a quick intro to kind of your role within the London market.
Sure, Jeremy. And I mean, I'll start off by saying it's been over a decade we've known each other, and it is Paolo Cuomo, not
He
Paolo
always gets it wrong. He mangles everything.
But that's
Paolo.
all right. I know you care really.
He can't say Chat GPT either.
Oh well, we'll get into that shortly, and whether that's a good or a bad thing. So yes, so I've been. In fact, my son asked me this the other day. He said, "Dad, how long have you been doing this insurance thing?" And that's probably the longest sentence he's uttered for a while. And I said, well, pretty much as long as you've been born. So I started in 2009 within the market and have done various roles on the broker side, the carrier side, the advisory side. But a sort of a theme cutting through it has always been how might we use technology better in the broadest sense, back end technologies, but also technology in its sort of role of ensuring we can underwrite better, handle claims better, and frankly ensure that risk transfer, which is the heart of what we do, is done as effectively as possible for clients.
Cool. And so what do you see as kind of the main issues, challenges, but also opportunities in kind of the short term? What are you working on at the moment?
I think 2025 at a headline level is going to be the same as the last 10 or 15 years, right? There's two things to do. One is to think about the ever-evolving risk landscape and how do carriers and brokers work out what are the right new products, the right amendment products that are continue to deliver that risk transfer. And then of course the other side of things, which is how can we be using data better, how can we be using technology better to deliver claims resolutions faster, to ensure that the underwriting is as accurate as possible, that data can be most effectively used. So those two themes frankly are no different in 2025 than they were in 2020 or 2015, but there's always just the colour of this specific year. And we're sitting here in January, we're at the moment watching the fires in LA. There's a question about what does that mean, what's going to need to change in terms of underwriting and products as a result of that. We're obviously also living in a world where we've just heard about the leadership transition at Lloyd, so therefore there's a question about the Blueprint 2 and where will that go. And so it's going to be a pretty interesting year.
And what I know we're talking about the future, Paolo, but the thing that you have perhaps a unique perspective or good perspective is have we made progress? Because I know we talk about all these things like in breathless terms of Blueprint and John Neal and what's going to happen, but they're all kind of individual kind of items, aren't they, within the whole big picture? But big picture, have we made progress? Is it kind of moving in the right direction, or is it stuttering?
I think we made a huge amount of progress, and we don't. I guess for two reasons. One is you tend not to see progress when you're living through it.
That's my point.
And the other thing is it's very easy to identify all the dozen things you might have wanted to do, and then you see you've only really done 2 or 3 of them well, and therefore you flagellate yourself for what you haven't done rather than being pleased with what you have. And a few things jump out, I guess, if we're sort of looking over the last 5 or 10 years. So a key one is the technology mindedness of leadership in just about every organisation in our sector. So apart from obviously the technology suppliers that have always been led by technologists, you did not used to have technology minded people on board. You had relatively little interest around technology in terms of sort of data, in terms of tools and software on executive teams, and that has completely changed. So you will not find a board or a leadership team that hasn't got at least a proportion of the people who are both interested in technology, aware of the importance of technology, and savvy enough that they can ensure the right conversations are happening.
Yeah, and presumably investment wise as well, you have to look like you're doing something around technology now, do you? I mean, in terms of your brand, you can't be going like we're not technologists.
No, and I mean the last thing you want to do as an insurance carrier or a broker is to sort of reposition yourself as a fintech or a tech play. That tends not to work. But yes, you need to be talking the right talk, and I think not only is it important in terms of your partners in the value chain, but what we've seen over the last few years, and it's particularly interesting right now where we're living through these early days of AI, is on the whole your staff want to know you're doing something with technology. So, you will be forgiven as a mid to large size organisation that you haven't got sort of the shiniest, sexiest tech tools in play. But if you've got a young broker, a young underwriter who's sitting there rekeying data or copy pasting things and looking to their peers and other organisations who are using technology more efficiently, they're going to get frustrated as employees.
Yeah.
And so, there's a message to your partners, a message to your owners, but also importantly a message to your employees that you're making the most of tech.
Yeah, so that kind of user friendliness of technology is really important. It's really important, isn't it? And we saw that a bit with Whitespace and PPL, didn't we? Which is, the front end of that was, massively more kind of engaging.
Absolutely.
And it helped it, I think.
So you mentioned AI, and I suppose we can put in there generative AI as being kind of the hot topic of the moment. And it seems to me, if you take kind of the Gartner hype cycle and you apply it to generative AI, we haven't had that kind of... We've had the hype and we've had the flurry around it, but we haven't then had this kind of dip into the trough of whatever they call it. And it seems to me that companies are using those technologies to create discrete proofs of concept that are actually delivering, and so we're getting this kind of, rather than this hype cycle that kind of dipped and then started to go back up, it dips a bit but then it goes up again because somebody does something that's impressive, they get return on investment, they might get a bit more funding or something like that now, and kind of carry on. Is that your sense, or are you seeing something different?
So I think Gartner called it the trough of disillusionment, or some wonderful phrase. Yes,
I
think it's interesting you say that we're seeing returns on investment, because I think on the whole we're probably not. We are seeing successful proof of concepts, and if you brought some true technologists into this conversation and said, what's your biggest worry, it would be exactly around that. They would say, look, it's actually relatively easy to do a proof of concept that is genuinely exciting to a senior underwriter, a senior broker, the executive team, but actually scaling it's a nightmare. And for a number of reasons, you may have really cleaned some data up or produced some really impressive training data in order to do that proof of concept, but can you scale that across the business? It could be that the nature of the data in 8 different divisions means that what might have worked in one is actually quite expensive then to roll out beyond. And so I think what we're absolutely seeing enough mini successes to avoid everyone saying, oh, it's like blockchain, or it's like whatever, it was all just a fad, but it is a long, slow, steady path to getting in a way really exciting. And I remember someone asking me recently, are we as an industry, are we not moving fast enough? And my view was we're probably moving absolutely fine, because this is not a technology where you want to be wasting lots of money, where you want to be promising the moon and then under delivering. It's a technology where you need good, solid, underlying infrastructure and data if you're going to be able to scale it in a way that's going to make a difference. What I find interesting is the way different companies, however, are approaching doing all these small things. And there was a podcast recently I was listening to where the executive was saying, our worry about doing too much with AI is that the data, people are going to use the data inappropriately, it's going to get out into the world and things. And I think we see a difference between those companies who have realised there's an awful lot you can do with AI in a secure environment, whether using a Microsoft Copilot solution or bringing in your own large language model, and then you sort of tell your staff, you're unleashed as long as you're doing it within this space, go test and trial, versus companies who are still a bit nervous. And I remember back to a story around, I think, the Toyota Prius, and how the Toyota Prius was always a little bit laughed at as a car, and really the only people who were excited about them were Uber drivers who could avoid the congestion charge. But actually what Toyota achieved through selling millions of those was the experience of billions of miles of a hybrid vehicle in a way that none of their competitors had. And I think we can draw some analogues there with those companies who are saying to their staff, hey, try this AI tool, try that AI tool. It's not going to change your world. It's not going to, suddenly take us from being, this profitable, that profitable, anything. But what it's doing is it's creating an entire set of staff who have dabbled, who have tried, who have seen what's possible. It's also allowed information security teams, IT teams, compliance teams to watch a whole load of what's going on in this AI space and get comfortable, so that as the scaling starts, they're already knowledgeable in it. And I think that's the difference we'll see over the next few years.
And you're also alluding to something that I've talked a bit about on the show, which is, it feels to me like it's quite democratic as I mean, if you just take AI in general, in other words, ChatGPT was put out to everybody could use it, and that for me was wow, I actually can just do this on my computer and play around with it. And to your previous example, and I think it's similar with Teslas as well, actually, there's that kind of there's byproducts, there's things that aren't the fundamental of an EV car that Tesla does amazingly, like the charging stuff and on an app and things like that are not often talked about. But the history of technology often has been that, the byproduct, the blue tack or the post-it note was a byproduct of something else that you thought you were doing, and I wonder whether you think that that's now where we're at a bit, because all of these millions of people with ideas playing around with this stuff there's going to be a genius somewhere who comes up with something, or there's going to be lots of people who incrementally make it better or do something different.
And there's undoubtedly going to be a genius here or there. I think for the majority of us, we can focus on the mundane and the incremental improvement. And we've talked before about these terms of sort of digital minion, digital Sherpa, where the idea is right now we should all be trying to use this technology to remove as many of the time wasted, for lack of a better word, that basic AI can do. That's simply going to give us more time. A triaging of our emails, or using the AI to reformat documents and things. So that's where your digital minions ought to be sort of running around, giving you back more time. And then we move into this sort of world of digital Sherpa, where what the AI is doing is starting to help you be even better at what you are. If you're a senior claims handler, a senior broker, an experienced underwriter, you've got 10 or 20 years experience. Right now, the machine cannot do your job better than you, but it can absolutely prompt you, nudge you, ask you questions, because what the machine has been able to do is look at all the data across the business, all the data that's available from outside, and says, okay, you as a human look like you want to make that decision around some underwriting, or that decision around a particular claim. By the way, let me present you with some new data you might not have been aware of, and then you as a human maybe will make a slightly different decision. And that's, I think, what is exciting over the next 2 or 3 years before the machines entirely take over, and then we'll have a different discussion.
That's a different discussion, I agree. Should be on the cusp of saying, I'll just profile you, Ben, and your family, and these are the product recommendations we make, and you can just press the button and buy them, and so it becomes complete kind of hassle-free but trustworthy. Is that kind of where we're getting to, or is it still going to be very much individual products sold by?
I think that's almost a different question in terms of what do you want to do both as a consumer? Do you want to trust a single supplier of all your insurance, or do you actually like, as you say, no one likes buying it, but you want to stay diversified? But I think, again, it comes down to risk transfer. It comes down to the fact that insurance companies are profit-making organisations. No one wants to, offer you for £500 an everything insurance package, because almost by definition, if we understand your need for car insurance, for home insurance, for your gadget insurance, we can do that, and we can price that, and yes, we can probably price it more accurately if we know more about Ben. But what we don't want to do is then take all the risk on as an insurance company to cover everything else. Let's say you happen to love climbing big tall trees. Frankly, if that's not covered as a part of a standard insurance product you're already buying, it shouldn't be sort of thrown in for free just to make your life easier. So
Yeah, I get it.
I think it's less about that. What you are seeing, if we take the SME side more than the personal line side, is you're seeing now technology that's plugging straight into the accounting system, the inventory system, the HR system of SMEs, and saying, oh right, you now have an extra 20 people, therefore your premium's going to go up by Y.
Triggers.
Or
Yeah.
you've now opened another office. And what that's doing is it's removing the need for human-to-human interaction, therefore it's reducing cost and things like that. So I think we'll absolutely see that more of that seamlessness, but I think that's different to some sort of everything package, which comes with, frankly, typically too much risk.
No, I mean, I think your
carrier.
point's really well made about that. And obviously with underinsurance and things like that, and property values and all the stuff we've had around cladding and things like that, you can really see its application, because a lot of it is just about record keeping, isn't it? And finding that the value you set wasn't the right value, therefore you create a huge amount of friction when you're saying, oh God, we got the wrong value in at the beginning and now there's a claim, and and so on. It's very interesting.
So, Paolo, I was going to move on to kind of what your what's occupying your thoughts at the moment, I suppose, and I'm going to kind of flip to the other side of AI, away from the opportunities to more of kind of the risk side of things. There's quite a lot of talk about hallucinations and understanding actually what's happening in a black box. Have you got any thoughts around that side of things?
I think that's a fascinating area, Jeremy, where it's it's all changing fast. My personal view is the term hallucination will go away in 2 or 3 years. It is a byproduct of us being in those very early days, and and for maybe those people who have sort of heard it but aren't entirely clear, it is a function of these early large language models we're using. They are optimized to give an interesting sort of satisfying answer to the user, not to be correct. So if you ask it something particularly specific that it doesn't know as a fact, because remember these aren't databases full of facts, then it can create what sounds like a very compelling answer that's just frankly wrong. And there's been plenty of examples over the last year or so of how that has been caused real problems for people and companies. That I think, as we get more sophisticated around AI, is going to change in a number of ways. One is the way the models are used, or models are built, will change and get more sophisticated, the way they will be used by individuals. But also you're going to essentially start to move into a world, I think, of AI that's sort of checking AI. And so you can right now we sort of think of a single large language model doing a bunch of things, but there's plenty of examples out there now of what organizations are trying to do, which is to create multiple machines, so to speak, that are all optimized around different things, and then they work in a collaborative sort of combative way to get the right answer. So one example that I've seen running live is from a cross-sell point of view. The machine's job was just to optimize the ability of the bank to cross-sell to its customers. But then they also had a compliance machine, and the job of the compliance machine was to say, well, hang on, you can't use that phrase, you can't do this, you can't do that. So instead of trying to make a machine that was really good at cross-sell within the constraints of the compliance, it said, we're going to make a cross-sale machine that's incredible, and we're going to make a compliance machine that's rock solid. And they're going to work together to come up with something that's going to be excellent at cross-selling without doing something inappropriate. And I think we're going to see more and more of that. One phrase that I'm increasingly hearing that's interesting is this concept of sociopathic intelligence. And this sort of relates to the idea that if you're trying to get a machine to do a particular job, there's a risk that it gets so focused on doing that it'll just sort of go for it. And this sort of thing sounds like a thought experiment maybe from a few years back, but we're in a time and place now where these machines are starting to take more important decisions, more important roles in processes, where it becomes pertinent. Because what you have to remember, so much of what we do as individuals and human beings is related to our cultural norms and what we've learned. You're not taught typically, unless you're a very misbehaving 5-year-old, you're not taught don't punch someone on the nose. You just pick that up as part of growing up. And where a machine has been trained to be excellent at task X, but has no awareness of what's going on around it, there's a risk that that sort of sociopathic focus will be great for what it needs to do, but if it hasn't got the right things around it. And so I think if you're a technologist in 2025 think, right, I've got to try and give some returns to my boss on what we're doing with AI, you're going to be, increasingly challenged by various people to say, are you thinking about that, that underlying sort of ethical side, sort of moral codes and things, which is a tricky one, because, it's already hard enough to build a business case, as it is, without someone then saying, oh, we've got to build in sort of these guardrails from the beginning.
And that's also a kind of psychological debate, isn't it, about whether we as humans are kind of changing to become, kind of more that kind of sociopathic ourselves, because we're literally following these kind of models by being on and, integrating with technology so much, that you lose that humans lose that context as well. They lose that ability to kind of judge things, if you like.
They do, but what we're very good at as communities is challenging each other.
Yeah.
So, if Ben's becoming a bit too much like that, then Jeremy's at some point is going to call him on it. Probably and hopefully before it becomes a problem.
Already that, by the way. Yeah.
This morning.
The question is, who's calling the machine, so to speak, in terms of that behaviour. And one of the other, I think, one of the discussion topics of 2025 and beyond is this sort of this unlearning. So, if the machine has learnt incorrectly, what can you do about that? So if Ben has learned to facts incorrectly or learned to cultural norm incorrectly, it's relatively easy for Jeremy to, after a few times of pointing out, say, look, you just shouldn't do that. Yeah. And as humans, we're pretty good at taking that on board and react to it. We're very good. We're at a point where we're doing an incredible job of training machines, but actually, if they're incorrectly trained because there was an issue with the training data, or because there's some inherent bias because of what they were shown or what they picked up, this concept of them unlearning certain things is going to be tricky, non-trivial, potentially expensive. And again, we're going to sort of see some dilemmas where it's like, okay, this machine is pretty good at doing these tasks, but it has these sort of issues with it. How do we manage that in the most cost-effective manner?
Yeah, which is, and that's central to insurance, isn't it? Because those decisions are often kind of almost ethical decisions that you take around claims, for example. There's a lot of talk now about empathy and how you build empathy into your claims service, for example, and it's really interesting.
That's why I'm pleased that insurance isn't the cutting edge of this.
Yeah.
Because ultimately for boring technological reasons, for just sort of stylistic reasons, and of course because of a sophisticated regulator keeping an eye on things, we are still going to, for several years, be in a place where this is sort of augmented human decision making, rather than the machines taking over.
Yeah.
And so that's why, again, I like this digital Sherpa idea, where we're saying, right, it's the human being who's still doing what he or she does well as an experienced human being, but augmented by the machine offering them additional thoughts. Because yes, between empathy, moral codes, etc., you want the human still at the heart of decision making as much as possible.
Yeah. Just to finish off, Paolo, I wanted to kind of look ahead. We always have conversations that are what's over the horizon, what should we be thinking about in the next perhaps 3 to 5 years, and I wonder if you had any thoughts around that for us.
It's very interesting, right? If we'd been sitting here a couple of years ago, we'd have sort of been mumbling about AI, but I don't think until ChatGPT came along in, what was it now, November of 22, whenever it was, and started making people realise the breadth and depth of change, the fact that this was not technology replacing blue collar workers, this was technology replacing white collar workers. I don't think we saw the extent and speed of that AI driven change. Now, my sense is, notwithstanding all these things we've said about the challenges of scaling and stuff, I think that we're almost all underestimating the breadth and speed and impact of what AI is going to do. Both in terms of changing the way we work, but of course, in terms of its use as a malicious tool and stuff. So I think, there is, anyone who says, it's just one of many things, I think is missing the scale and the extent that it's going to change everything. But not just harping on about that. I think, insurance has to grapple with an increasingly volatile world, And back to what we've been saying for 10 or so years now, as we've been getting more and more data in. We're getting more and more data in, more and more insight, but we're still inherently writing 12-month policies based on a relatively modest amount of input data. And I think we have seen so many successes over the last 5 or so years about using more data, about using it better, about getting more insights, about trying to prevent claims rather than just react to claims. And I think that it would be a shame if the momentum of that in any way slowed down. If our ability to move to more parametric products where that's the right answer for people, where the ability to use the nigh on infinite amounts of data that are now available to help on the risk management side, I really feel that notwithstanding the fact that however much data you've got, if a hurricane hits your building, it may well fall down. The insight that we can get in terms of what angle to build your roofs, or as we're seeing in LA now, we're going to have to rebuild 10, 20, 50,000 structures. Which ones haven't burnt down? Right, how can you define building codes to do that? That is something that is of such relevance to the insurance industry, not just to the local planners or local builders.
Fascinating.
Good, right. Thank you ever so much for coming in and talking to us, Paolo. Great discussion as always, and we'll catch up later in the year perhaps. And
good, and see what's coming true and all of the things that we've failed to predict.
Exactly, as always. We don't know the future.
Indeed.
It's good to have a go at it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Jeremy. Thank you, Ben.